Are you an artist that's struggling to capture the unique characteristics of tree bark and tree trunks? Well, you're not alone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint tree trunks and bark with this gum tree scene here inspired by the Murray River in Australia. And I'll show you my exact 6-step process that transforms ordinary tree paintings into masterpieces. This painting is inspired by a location by the Murray River in Australia, and it's a place that I went plein air painting 10 years ago. And shortly after that trip, I did a large painting of this scene. And I just wanted to see how far I'd progressed in the last 10 years, so decided to paint the scene again, this time with a different composition. The first painting, I removed the main tree that's in this composition and made more of a feature of the river, but in this case I wanted to make more of a feature of the actual tree trunks themselves. Now I'm sketching out my composition using burnt sienna and oleo gel, which helps to thin the paint. I'm painting in oils, and the brand of paint that I'm using is Blue Ridge oils, and if you want to get some, I'll put a link in the description box below. I'm also painting on a 12-inch by 16-inch wooden panel. Now whenever I start a painting, and you will have heard me say this loads if you've watched any of my other videos, but I always start with the darkest darks first, so the dark values first, and values how light or dark your subject is. So if you paint your darks first, it makes it so much easier to paint all the areas in light afterwards. So this is step number 1, paint your dark values and shadows first. So for the darkest darks here, I've used a mix of ultramarine blue with some burnt sienna and a little alizarin crimson. And then for the shadows in the side of the tree trunks, I've used a mix of ultramarine blue with some burnt sienna, some alizarin crimson and some titanium white. Then for the tree foliage, which is also quite dark in value, especially where it's in shadow, I've used combinations of ultramarine blue with yellow ochre, a little titanium white, some cobalt teal and alizarin crimson. Now in my opinion, painting the dark values and shadows first is the key to creating realistic looking landscapes, especially painting trees. Now step number 2 is to use loose brushwork, and you can do this by using big brushes, at least big compared with the size of the canvas or panel in this case that you're painting on. By using big brushes, you're going to cover ground more quickly, but also get nice loose gestural painterly brush marks. You can always add detail later on, so if you're struggling with trying to loosen up your brushwork, or your paintings are just overly detailed and it's making them look stiff and rigid, then using the biggest brushes that you can get away with will help you to loosen up your brushwork and create that nice painterly effect in your artwork. Then once it's dry, you can start adding details and using smaller brushes. Now step number 3 is to paint the areas in light. So in this case, I'm working on the tree foliage, of which it's covering a lot of the painting, and marking that in again with a number 6 bristle flat brush. So a nice large brush for some gestural painterly brush marks. Now to mix the colours for the tree trunks that are in light, I've used combinations of yellow ochre, a little alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, titanium white and even a little bit of ultramarine blue. We want to make these tree trunks look like they're old and gnarly and that there's bark peeling off it. So I've got lots of textures in there which I've made with my bristle flat brush. For the grass here in the foreground, again I've used combinations of yellow ochre, titanium white, some burnt sienna, some ultramarine blue and a little alizarin crimson. And then for the foliage, I've used combinations of yellow ochre with cadmium yellow medium, ultramarine blue and titanium white, which serves as the base, the foundation of my greens. And then I've been able to add colours such as cadmium red light or burnt sienna to add that red element to the foliage. Gum tree leaves tend to be more dusty looking and often have olive tones in them. Now as this is a gum tree forest by the Murray River here, I wanted to convey an abundance of trees, so I've marked in lots of stems and branches with my shadow mix, and I've actually found that it's easier to paint stems and branches using a flat brush rather than using a round brush. Now at the moment I'm not going overly detailed with the branches. I just want to paint the suggestion of just a few, and then I'll add some more details later on. To paint the sky here, I wanted to convey a hot, dusty looking Australian sky, so I used a mix of titanium white with some ultramarine blue, a little bit of cobalt teal and a little bit of yellow ochre. Now at this point the panel was covered, and I went back to adding a bit more detail to the tree before I completed the block-in stage, and I was using some synthetic brushes as well as some bristle brushes as well. So adding more of the texture of that gnarled looking bark, and also just increasing the saturation of some of the colour. For example, adding some cadmium red light and some alizarin crimson as well as burnt sienna to the bark of the main gum tree in the scene. And then painting some more of the reflected light in the side of the bark using a combination of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, titanium white, alizarin crimson and even a little bit of cobalt teal. Now if you'd like to learn more about painting landscapes, including my whole painting process that you can apply to your own paintings, then check out my free landscape painting blueprint. Just click the link below and I'll send it over to you. Enjoy! So now the painting is dry and I'm beginning the next step, which is step number 4, modeling and adding details. So this is where I'm working on individual zones in the painting, and the way I tackle these types of paintings is I usually go for the hardest thing first. So in this case the gum trees, in my opinion the most difficult thing in the painting to paint, so I tackle these first. I'm now using synthetic flat brushes so that I can get a more defined edge, especially for detail work. So I'm trying to build up the texture of the bark. A lot of the bark is peeling off as well, exposing the smooth, creamy coloured bark underneath. Now when I started my painting, I kept my tones darker, so that allows me to paint the areas in light and just build up those layers, and that's going to convey more depth in the painting. So these lighter layers that I'm adding for the highlights in the trees, I'm using lighter colour. It's always best to keep your painting tonally darker to begin with, and then build up those lighter layers, and then we'll be saving our lightest lights until the end of the painting. At this point I'd spent time working on both trees, so adding more details to the bark and the sunlit areas of the tree trunks. I was using varying combinations of burnt sienna, yellow ochre, titanium white, a bit of alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue and cadmium red light, and all the while when I was painting I was just keeping in mind the value, i.e. the lights and darks. I think this is more important than the colour mixing, so I'm always thinking in terms of value when I'm painting. So then I was spending time building up the foliage in the background here, which is really making up a bulk of the scene. So again, using combinations of yellow ochre, cadmium yellow medium, ultramarine blue, titanium white, and then also cadmium red light and burnt sienna, I was marking in the highlight areas where the leaves are in the full sun, and just building up those lighter layers of paint. So I hope you're enjoying this video so far, and I'd like to introduce to you the sponsor of this video, which is Craft Geek. Now Craft Geek make artist tripod easels as well as projector tripods, music stands and phone tripods. Now I don't often promote these types of companies in my videos, but one of the things I was looking for was just a simple tripod easel that I could use in my small art studio. The thing is, I don't actually have a whole lot of space in my art studio, so it's really important that my easel isn't going to take up too much of that space. So this was something I was looking for anyway, and actually Craft Geek reached out to me. Pure coincidence, but I've tried out their easel and I absolutely love it, and I only promote things on this channel that I use myself. Now this easel is super compact and lightweight and is really easy to set up. As you can see, I'm just unfolding it there, and I actually set this up to test it out on a painting that I'm working on at the moment. In fact, in the end I was able to actually rest the back leg on that table there, again because I don't have a whole lot of space in my studio. So I just tested out this easel on this 20" by 20" mountain landscape painting that I'm working on at the moment, and it was just really easy to use and a pleasure to paint on. So I'm going to be using this easel all the time. Now if you want to get one of these tripod easels, right now CraftGeek are giving my viewers a 15% discount. All you need to do is just type in the discount code Samuel Art and you'll get your 15% discount. Just click the link below. Now, as I say, I'm loving this easel, and you might notice that I'm now using it for this painting here. So it's going to be a thing I'm going to be regularly using in my studio. But back to the painting, and I'm doing some more work on the grass here. And this is where I'm getting to step number 5, which is refining the painting. So I've got the core details down and the main body of the landscape in general. So I'm adding more to the individual zones in the painting, so adding more lighter tones, more details. For example, there's more lighter layers to be added to the grass in the foreground. I'm adding more details to the tree stems and trunks, painting more of the network of branches in between the foliage. For this, I've mainly been using synthetic flat brushes, as I find that these are best for painting branches and trees. I'm thinking about just building up the paint layers in this artwork. I'm restating dark values if I need to. For example, some of the occlusion shadows in the foliage in the background. Restating and painting more of the stems and branches. And then also adding more highlights as well. A lot of this stage of the painting as well is also just painting a lot of the halftones. So this could be in the foliage, and also more details in the main tree here in the tree bark. Now, whilst we're adding all these details, we do need to be careful not to be mudding up our colours. So if it's not possible to add more details because the layer of paint underneath is wet, then just let it dry and then paint over it. Now, at this point in the painting, I did let the whole thing dry, and then this comes to the final step, step number 6, and this is where I've saved my lightest values until last. I'm also adding the last final details as well. So we've been building up to this throughout the whole painting, and what I'm doing here at the moment is I'm painting the suggestion of leaves that are catching the full sun. So the foliage I painted in the previous layers, I left darker and used a lot of halftones. So now that I'm layering on my lightest tones here within the tree foliage, it's really starting to stand out. Now, you don't need to paint every leaf. We can just paint the suggestion of a few leaves, and it goes a long way to making it look realistic. Now, part of adding the final details as well as my lightest lights is also restating some dark values if needed. For example, the occlusion shadows in some of these trees in the background. But then just adding more details in these tree canopies overall. But next, I'm saving my lightest lights for the tree bark itself, and this is what's really going to make it pop. So adding my lightest lights to that creamy coloured bark, and for this I used a mix of yellow ochre with a lot of titanium white. There's also a tiny amount of burnt sienna in there. But you can see that adding those last highlights to the tree trunk there has really added so much more depth to it and makes it look really realistic. So then after painting the tree trunks, I was adding some highlights to some of the other tree stems and branches in the background. There's also, I painted the suggestion of a few blades of grass sticking up in the foreground with a synthetic rigger brush. When I paint grass, I don't like to go overly detailed. I prefer to just imply dense grass rather than painting every single blade of grass. The other thing I added was some more final details to these trees, such as the reflected light. And again, using the same colours that I used in the blocking stage, mixes of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, titanium white, alizarin crimson and cobalt teal to create that nice reflected light in the side of the trunk, but also convey those light tones, at least where the creamy coloured bark is. Now, as we get towards the end of this painting, I'd like to recap on what we've covered in this video, but also how I generally approach my paintings in stages. So I always start off by painting my dark values and shadows first, and I use loose brushwork. Then I paint the areas in light, but overall I keep my paintings tonally darker in the blocking stage so that I have plenty of room to add lighter layers of paint. Then once dry, I begin the modelling and adding detail stage. So this is where I'm working on individual zones in the painting. So in this painting, I just tackled what I thought were the hardest things to paint first of all, which was the tree trunks. So I like to get the most difficult parts out of the way. And then what I'm also doing is building up lighter layers of paint. I don't want to go too light to start with, but once I'm at this stage of the painting, I can create more of the half tones in the scene and build up lighter layers. Then once I've added more details and build out more of the structure of the painting, I can then get into the next stage, which is refining the painting. So working on more of the individual zones, tidying up areas and just getting it ready so that I can add those lightest layers of paint, which I save until last. So saving my lightest values and last details until the end. And that's what's going to make the painting pop. This is where you'll save your lightest tones. So at this point of the painting, it was pretty much complete. Sometimes I find it difficult to know when to put my brushes down, but often I'll just leave my painting for a few days, come back to it and just see if it needs any more work doing to it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to learn more about painting trees, then check out this video here. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.